Okay. Well, I was talking about a little girl, a toddler that I recently heard about who saw a mouse and the mouse was dead. And she told her mom, I saw a mouse, the mouse was dead, and I touched it. And this was a little girl. And so the mom was like, kind of like, is that okay? I'm like, yeah, she's seeing death in real life, no pun intended. But she's seeing death. She used the right word dead. She gets it. It wasn't moving. So she wanted to touch it. She also said she went to a what we call visitation. Well, in the Midwest, I think they call visitation. In the South, they often call it a wake. Anybody with me? Where you go to, I mentioned that last week, where you go to see the body or visit with the family or whatever. And oftentimes there's an open casket. And so this particular little girl was there and had seen somebody's grandmother in the casket, and she said, "I want to go back and see that lady." And she's like, the mom said, "Is that okay?" And I said, "Yeah." It's interesting because it's curious to them. They don't normally see somebody lying in a casket or whatever it's called, lying in a casket where people are coming around and talking to them. So think about how odd that is. I remember my first time as a kid doing that with my family. My grandfather, I think, was my first person that passed away that I remember. And my mom my mom encouraged me to touch his body. And the reason I think now, being an adult, I was like, I don't know about that. But I felt him and he was cold. And the idea for me, it was healing for me because I realized, oh, he's not there. As a Christian, right, we know that we talked about this last week too. We know that when someone dies, their soul is with God. Their body is then dead. And so to distinguish the two and to say, oh, my granddaddy, that's what we called him. Granddaddy is his body is dead. He's not there anymore. He's cold. He doesn't look the same. His coloring looks funny. He's stiff, that kind of stuff. People always say, oh, they look so good, right? That's the common, oh, he looks so nice. But when you think about that, for me, it was like, oh, but he's not there. And so that can be healing for kids. Not that they have to touch the person, but if they are curious, that's okay. A lot of people do. Sometimes people do weird things at funerals with dead people. Not, I don't mean anything inappropriate, but like, have you ever seen people kiss their face or leave something in the casket? Sometimes that happens on Dateline, and then they get curious. But the idea of having a dead body there or something, that is very normal. So if kids ask about that, that's okay. I mean, in using the language, we talked about this last week, using the language of death, die, dead, those are not bad words. Oftentimes we say somebody passed away, somebody passed. What's another one? We talked about last week, sometimes people say they go to sleep. And talked about how that's not a good thing to say because then they might be scared when they go to sleep that they'll die. I mean, kids are very literal. We also don't want to say things like they became an angel because that's not biblical. Said that last week as well. But keep in mind, the grieving process is different for kids. So that's what I really want to focus on today is the idea, as I said earlier, that kids can grieve in spurts. They can be playing. They might act out something too. When kids play, you all have heard of play therapy, right? So there's an actual therapy, several kinds of therapy. So play therapy where children actually are encouraged to play or draw or do something physical with their hands. And while they're doing it, the therapist is talking to them, asking them questions and things like that. Children learn through play. Maria Montessori said that children's play is their work, something like that. It's not exact, but that's basically what she said. And then also children learn and they express themselves through play. You'll see kids that are playing sometimes in the two Barbies and they're doing certain things, and sometimes you might go, oh my gosh, where have you seen that before, right? Nobody's ever experienced that while the Barbies are naked, right? Anyway, they're not laughing at me. I guess I'm not funny.
You're not.
That's
There's,
okay.
there's something wrong with
It's
them.
uncomfortable to
It's
talk
not
about,
you.
right?
It's
Naked
not you.
Barbies. But really, kids might act out something. You might hear, if you're just paying attention to them play, they might be acting out what happened with grandma or grandpa or whatever. They might have questions, and you want to answer those questions the best you can. So why did grandma die? And think about it as an adult, how can I say that in such a way that it makes sense? Well, in our world, our bodies don't live forever. I'm just going off the cuff here, but our bodies don't live forever. God designed our bodies to work on earth, but our bodies are corruptible. That's the spiritual word. And so they don't live forever. And so sometimes our bodies get tired. They don't work as well as they're supposed to, and things don't work as well as they're supposed to. They won't live forever. Nobody will. besides Jesus, because he is with God forever. But we get to go, when our bodies die, our soul lives forever. The part inside of us, our personality, the part that decides things and follows Jesus, lives forever. So even when our bodies die, we get to be with God forever. We get to be with Jesus forever. Whatever language you want to use there that's appropriate. But you gonna say something about that?
And then later on, if they're a Christian, they get a resurrected body.
Yes, later
A
on.
new body that doesn't get sick.
Remember when, this is a good way to talk about this with kids too. When Jesus, we're talking about this right now, and you guys are in Acts upstairs too, but downstairs with the kids as well, that when Jesus showed up to people after he was resurrected, people didn't recognize him. Do you remember those stories? Like the guys on the road to Emmaus, and Jesus starts talking to them, and they're sad. He starts talking to them and explaining the scriptures, but they don't recognize him until he's in a room with them and breaks bread. And they're, oh. So clearly he looked different, right? And then he shows his hands and his feet, things like that. So we will receive, like David said, a body that doesn't have pain anymore, doesn't have hurt anymore, doesn't one day. So why did grandma die? That's a whole long thing to get to it. Well, our bodies just don't live forever. And I know it's sad, right? We're going to miss seeing grandma. We won't get to hug her now on earth. We won't get to spend time or eat her great oatmeal cream pies. But one day we'll get to be with grandma forever, and we'll all have new bodies that will never get sick or die. You can say something about that.
I had two other things that are related to that, but not.
Go.
Aw. Hello.
Good morning.
It's an ill time. Don't worry about them. They're not going to laugh. They don't laugh at good jokes. They don't appreciate good humor. Two things to reiterate. One is, of course, fantastic. Just to repeat also for the camera, you said is that we should not expect children to say, I'm really sad when they're very young. When they get older, it's different, obviously. Ideally, when they become teenagers, it's different to say, I'm really having a hard time, or they're crying. But when they're very young, what we look for is change in moods. If they seem extra irritable, rebellious, having a hard day. So said, be quiet, I told you. If we can just be sensitive a little bit, realize maybe it's because grandma died or their dog died or they lost their favorite flower or whatever it might be, or something at school happened.
Yeah.
We just pay attention to mood changes. Doesn't have to mean something serious to it. That's a big thing, which you've alluded to several times. They might not say, I'm really sad, but, and while they're playing, we listen. Because this is fairly common in parenting to project upon children, or rather transfer your own pain into children.
Right.
Like who, like who's your mom? It may not, they can be in a very different place of the grieving process, if they even grieve at all. So we do not, it's called transference. We don't transfer our own pain or woundedness to a child. We don't ever do that. We can ask them, how are you feeling? And they go, in the sense of, we don't want to assume they're feeling something they're not feeling. That's all. Right. It's just a dumb weed. We don't want to transfer them. We don't want to how they want to tell them you upset. And it's amazing how place to say, that makes sense. Or they, okay? You sure? Are you really? I used to work with a woman